Hi there, my name is James, and welcome to True Crime Chronicles. Here, we uncover the most shocking and mysterious true crime stories from across the world. In today's story, we dive into a chilling case of manipulation, control, and a tragic death. Let's get started. Visualize a peaceful sunrise over Clearwater, a quiet town that wakes slowly to its routines. Soft, golden light filters through the trees as the streets begin to stir. But today, something is different. The camera pans across a luxurious house where the front door stands ominously ajar, casting an unsettling shadow on the doorstep. Walking past the house is Miriam Cox, an elderly neighbor known for her morning strolls. She pauses, her brow furrowing as she senses that something is wrong. Inside that home, 21-year-old Lucas Donovan, a promising young man with a bright future, lies lifeless on the floor. What had happened behind these closed doors? Lucas Donovan wasn't the kind of person anyone expected to find in such a situation. Raised by his single mother, Brenda Donovan, Lucas was a quiet, creative soul. He had big dreams of becoming a photographer, and though he was still figuring out his path in life, those dreams kept him grounded. His relationship with his mother was close. Brenda had sacrificed everything to raise him. Together, they had endured financial hardships, but Lucas never let that define him. The camera lingers on Lucas, a gentle and reserved young man, someone you'd instinctively root for. His passion for photography served as his escape, a way to capture beauty in even the simplest, most mundane moments. But everything changed in June 2021 when he crossed paths with Evelyn Briscoe. Evelyn Briscoe, in stark contrast, was the polar opposite of Lucas. At 62 years old, she was a powerful and wealthy real estate mogul, notorious for her extravagant lifestyle. Throughout her life, she had always gotten what she wanted, and when she set her sights on Lucas, his world would change forever. What could have led this quiet, introspective young man into a marriage with a woman more than 3 times his age? And more tragically, what caused his untimely death? Let's step back to where it all began, the summer of 2021. Lucas Donovan, still full of dreams and optimism, attended a charity auction at the Clearwater Ridge Resort in June. It was a high society event, the kind of place where Lucas didn't quite belong. Surrounded by expensive artwork and influential people, he kept to himself, camera in hand, trying to capture the evening's charm through his lens. That's when Evelyn Briscoe noticed him. Evelyn, who was accustomed to commanding attention, was no stranger to turning heads. At 62, she had built a real estate empire from the ground up. Wealthy, flamboyant, and always in control, she naturally stood out in any crowd. That night, she caught sight of Lucas, a quiet, unassuming young man who seemed out of place among the elite. Her interest was piqued, and it wasn't long before she approached him. Evelyn Briscoe to Lucas Donovan. "You have a good eye for photography. Maybe you could come work for me and take some photos for my properties." From that moment, Evelyn swept Lucas into her world of luxury. It started with work, photo shoots for her high-end properties. But soon it became personal. Evelyn was known for getting what she wanted, and Lucas was no exception. The two quickly grew close, though those around Lucas began to notice that something wasn't quite right. Evelyn's dominance over Lucas was clear from the start. She was controlling, used to having her way, and Lucas, quiet, unsure, and still trying to find his place, was easily swept up in her influence. He was young, impressionable, and drawn into a world far removed from his modest upbringing. Within 6 months of their meeting, Evelyn convinced Lucas to marry her. It wasn't just the age difference that made people uneasy, it was the power imbalance. Lucas wasn't the type to make rash decisions, but something about Evelyn's forceful personality left him with little room to breathe. The wedding, held at the lavish Clearwater Ridge Resort on December 15, 2021, was nothing short of extravagant. The wedding was a spectacle of wealth, designer clothes, gourmet food, and a guest list filled with elite socialites. Everything was perfect on the surface, but to those who knew Lucas, it was clear he didn't belong. Among the grandeur and luxury, he seemed like a shadow of himself. Clara Morgan, a waitress working the event, later shared her observations. Clara Morgan, eyewitness. Lucas looked like he didn't belong there. He seemed out of place, like he wasn't fully present. Evelyn, on the other hand, was glowing. She was in control of everything. As the wedding progressed, Lucas seemed to retreat further into himself. When the couple exchanged vows, the camera zooms in on Lucas's face, distant, distracted. There was an unmistakable unease in his expression, a stark contrast to Evelyn's radiant smile. It was as if Lucas was realizing at that very moment how trapped he had become. Trapped in a marriage that he hadn't truly chosen, trapped in a life where he no longer had control. Those who attended the wedding couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Lucas's mother, Brenda, watched her son closely that day. She knew him better than anyone, and she could sense that the Lucas standing before her wasn't the same young man who once dreamed of a future filled with creativity and freedom. Now he was tied to a woman who controlled every aspect of his life. For Lucas, the months that followed the wedding were nothing short of suffocating. He had withdrawn from his friends and family, spending most of his time in Evelyn's world, isolated, distant, and seemingly resigned to his new reality. It wasn't long before the cracks in their marriage began to show. The once hopeful young man who dreamed of becoming a photographer had lost his way, trapped in a marriage defined by power and control. Behind closed doors, things were far worse than anyone could have imagined. Evelyn's controlling behavior only intensified, and Lucas found himself questioning his every move. He confided in his mother that he felt suffocated, unsure of how to escape. He had made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. And just 3 months after their wedding, Lucas Donovan would be dead. What happened inside the Briscoe home during those final days? And how did this young man, once full of potential, end up trapped in a deadly relationship? On the morning of March 14th, 2022, the quiet town of Clearwater awoke to a tragedy no one could have expected. At 7:45 a.m., Miriam Cox, an 80-year-old neighbor of Evelyn and Lucas Briscoe, was taking her routine morning walk. She had lived in the area for decades, always keeping an eye on the neighborhood, but today, something felt off. As Miriam passed the Briscoe home, she noticed the front door was slightly ajar, a detail that immediately caught her attention. Evelyn was known for keeping her home pristine, with every detail meticulously controlled. Seeing the door left open wasn't normal. Curiosity, and perhaps a sense of unease, drew Miriam closer. She called out for Evelyn but received no response. Hesitant, she stepped inside. What she found next would shake the entire town. The usually immaculate home was eerily silent. A faint chemical smell filled the air, and as Miriam entered the living room, her heart stopped. There, lying on the floor next to the couch, was Lucas Donovan, motionless. His face was pale, and his body was unnaturally still. Beside him were several empty pill bottles. Panic washed over Miriam as she fumbled to dial 911. Miriam Cox's 911 call. I found him. There's a young man here. I think he's dead. Please send someone quickly. By 8 o'clock, the Clearwater police arrived at the scene. Detective Sylvia Harris was the first to step inside. A seasoned investigator, she had seen her fair share of tragedies, but there was something unsettling about this one. Lucas, only 21, had his whole life ahead of him. What had led him to this tragic end? The scene was almost too clean. The empty pill bottles indicated a possible overdose, but the neat arrangement of the furniture raised a red flag for Detective Harris. Everything was in place. Nothing was disturbed, no sign of a struggle. It felt more like a setup than an accident. Detective Sylvia Harris. It's like the scene was staged before we got here. The autopsy confirmed what Detective Harris had suspected. Lucas had a lethal combination of sedatives and antidepressants in his system, far beyond what could be considered an accidental overdose. But the pills, prescribed to Evelyn, raised even more questions. As the investigation deepened, the police turned their attention to the most obvious suspect, Evelyn Briscoe. Later that day, Detective Harris and her partner, Officer James Lang, interviewed Evelyn at her home. Sitting poolside in a designer robe, Evelyn's reaction to Lucas's death was shockingly calm. She expressed mild sadness, but no real grief. When asked about the medications, she claimed Lucas had been struggling emotionally and had taken her pills without her knowledge. Evelyn Briscoe. He'd been acting distant lately, taking my medication to help him sleep. I had no idea he'd take so many. Evelyn's story seemed too convenient. Her cool demeanor, even in the face of her young husband's death, unsettled Detective Harris. Something was off, but without hard evidence, the police couldn't arrest her. The investigation was just beginning. As the news of Lucas's death spread through Clearwater, suspicion grew. How had a bright young man, once full of life, ended up here? What secrets were hidden behind the walls of the Briscoe mansion? And more importantly, was Lucas's death really an accident, or something far more sinister? With Lucas Donovan's tragic death confirmed, the investigation shifted into high gear. Detective Sylvia Harris knew there was more to the story than just an overdose. Too many details felt off, and the eerie calmness of Evelyn Briscoe only deepened her suspicions. Something wasn't right, and Harris was determined to find out what it was. The day after Lucas's body was found, Detective Harris met with his mother, Brenda Donovan. Grief-stricken and exhausted, Brenda struggled to make sense of her son's sudden death. Sitting in the modest living room of her small home, Brenda spoke quietly, tears in her eyes. Brenda Donovan. Lucas wasn't happy. I could see it in his eyes. He felt trapped in that marriage. He told me he wanted out, but Evelyn wouldn't let him go. Brenda recounted how Lucas had become distant after marrying Evelyn. He had cut off contact with most of his friends, and his once vibrant passion for photography had faded. Lucas had always been a sensitive soul, but Brenda sensed a deeper despair in her son's final months. He confided in her that Evelyn had become controlling, watching his every move, limiting his freedom. Brenda Donovan. He said he didn't know how to leave. He was scared of her, of what she might do if he tried to walk away. This revelation only heightened Detective Harris's suspicions. Lucas had wanted to leave the marriage just days before his death. Could Evelyn have known this? And if so, did she act to ensure Lucas never left? As the investigation deepened, Harris uncovered more disturbing details about Evelyn's behavior. Evelyn had always been known for her strong personality, but her marriage to Lucas seemed different. It wasn't just control. It was possession. Harris next turned to Officer James Lang, her partner, who had been looking into Lucas's financial records. What he found was startling. After the wedding, Evelyn had put Lucas's name on several of her bank accounts, giving him access to substantial wealth. But Lucas hadn't touched any of it. Despite living in luxury, he hadn't spent a cent of Evelyn's money. Officer James Lang. It's strange. Most people in his situation would use the money, but it's like he didn't want any of it. He stayed in the marriage, but he never took anything from her. This raised more questions than answers. Why would Lucas, who had grown up with financial struggles, refuse access to millions? Could it have been a sign that he was planning to leave, wanting no part of Evelyn's world? Things took a darker turn when an anonymous letter arrived at the Clearwater Police Department just a few days later. Inside was a USB drive with a note warning the police to look closer at Evelyn. The USB contained a shocking series of text messages between Evelyn and a private investigator she had hired to follow Lucas. The messages painted a disturbing picture. Evelyn had been growing increasingly paranoid about Lucas, fearing he would leave her. She had hired the investigator to track his every move, ensuring she had control over every aspect of his life. Text messages from Evelyn Briscoe, March 12, 2022. Lucas thinks he can just walk out on me. He's wrong. He owes me, and I won't let him forget it. The messages revealed more than just Evelyn's possessiveness. They suggested a darker motivation, fear of abandonment, and a desire to keep Lucas under her control at any cost. One message sent just 2 days before Lucas's death. hinted at the possibility of her taking action to prevent him from leaving. Detective Harris now had a critical piece of the puzzle. Evelyn wasn't just a controlling wife. She was a woman determined to hold on to her young husband by any means necessary. But was that enough to prove she had a hand in Lucas's death? The investigation was beginning to uncover the truth, but there were still many questions. What exactly had happened inside the Briscoe mansion in the days leading up to Lucas's death? And could Evelyn be held accountable for more than just manipulation? The stakes were getting higher, and Harris knew the answers would soon come to light. Detective Sylvia Harris couldn't shake the growing suspicion that Lucas Donovan's death wasn't a tragic accident. The clean crime scene, Evelyn Briscoe's disturbingly calm demeanor, and the revelation of Lucas wanting to leave the marriage, everything pointed to something darker. But without solid proof, it was only a gut feeling. Then, just days later, the case took a dramatic turn. On March 18, 2022, an envelope delivered anonymously to the Clearwater Police Department changed everything. Inside was a single USB drive and a note with just 4 words. "Look closer at Evelyn." It was a strange message, but what was on the USB would shock everyone involved in the case. When Detective Harris inserted the drive into her computer, a series of text messages appeared. Messages between Evelyn Briscoe and a private investigator she had hired to follow Lucas. The timestamp on the messages was recent, dating back to just days before Lucas's death. Text messages from Evelyn Briscoe, March 12, 2022. "He's been distant lately. I think he's planning something." Evelyn's words dripped with paranoia. She wasn't just worried about Lucas drifting away emotionally. She feared he was preparing to leave her for good. The private investigator's reports described Lucas spending more time alone, avoiding Evelyn, and talking less about their future. It was clear he was pulling away, and Evelyn's grip on him was slipping. Text messages from Evelyn Briscoe. "If Lucas thinks he can just walk out on me, he's wrong. He owes me his life, and I won't let him forget it." The tone of Evelyn's messages was controlling and possessive, hinting at a woman on the edge, terrified of losing what she believed she owned. The texts revealed her growing desperation to keep Lucas within her control, but one particular message caught Detective Harris's attention. It was sent 2 days before Lucas was found dead. Text message, March 12, 2022. "He's been acting strange. I think it's time to take action. I'll make sure he stays." What exactly did Evelyn mean by taking action? The message was chilling. It hinted at Evelyn's willingness to do whatever was necessary to ensure Lucas stayed in the marriage, no matter the cost. Combined with the details from Lucas's mother, Brenda, about his plans to leave Evelyn, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Detective Harris knew this wasn't a simple overdose anymore. This was manipulation, perhaps even murder. But Evelyn was smart, and there was still no hard evidence linking her directly to Lucas's death. The messages were enough to show Evelyn's control, but could they prove her intent to harm him? With this new information, Detective Harris and her team intensified their investigation. They dug deeper into Evelyn's past, finding a pattern of controlling behavior in her previous relationships. She had a history of clinging to her partners, and when things didn't go her way, she often resorted to extreme measures to maintain control. But in all those cases, nothing had ever escalated to the point of death. Lucas's case was different. Evelyn's fear of abandonment, combined with her wealth and power, had created a toxic environment. She saw Lucas as not just a husband, but as someone she owned, and she wasn't going to let him go without a fight. The police also interviewed the private investigator hired by Evelyn. He confirmed that she had instructed him to track Lucas's every move, reporting back on even the smallest details of his life. It painted a clear picture of a woman obsessed with control, terrified of losing her hold on the young man she had lured into her life. The investigation was reaching its tipping point. Detective Harris had enough to confront Evelyn, but the question remained. Was this about control, or had Evelyn done something even more sinister to ensure Lucas would never leave? The text messages had provided a glimpse into Evelyn's mind, but they still didn't answer the biggest question. What really happened the night Lucas Donovan died? The tension was mounting, and with every new discovery, it became clearer that Evelyn wasn't going to escape scrutiny. The truth was beginning to emerge, but there were still key pieces missing from the puzzle. Detective Harris knew that if she wanted to bring justice for Lucas, she had to act fast. By now, the case against Evelyn Briscoe was growing stronger. The anonymous USB drive, the obsessive text messages, and the pattern of controlling behavior painted a disturbing picture. Still, Detective Sylvia Harris needed more. The team continued to gather evidence, knowing that Evelyn's wealth and influence meant she wouldn't go down without a fight. Then, on March 20th, 2022, after weeks of investigation, Harris and her team made their move. Detectives arrived at Evelyn's luxurious Clearwater home, a mansion that seemed untouched by the tragedy unfolding within. Evelyn was lounging by her pool, just as she had been when Lucas was first found dead. There was no hint of grief or remorse, just the same eerie calm that had unnerved everyone from the start. When Detective Harris approached, Evelyn didn't flinch. She was confident, too confident, but as the officers placed her under arrest for second-degree murder, that confidence quickly faded. Evelyn Briscoe, upon arrest. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything. He did this to himself." Evelyn was taken into custody, but the fight was far from over. The trial, which began on July 5th, 2023, became a media sensation. The courtroom was packed, with journalists eager to cover the bizarre case of the wealthy widow and her young husband's mysterious death. The prosecution laid out their case clearly. They argued that Evelyn, driven by fear and obsession, had intentionally drugged Lucas to prevent him from leaving her. They pointed to the text messages, which revealed her mindset in the days leading up to his death. Prosecutor's opening statement. Evelyn Briscoe controlled Lucas Donovan in life, and when he tried to break free, she controlled his death. This was no accident. It was calculated. The defense, however, painted a different picture. They argued that Lucas was emotionally unstable, struggling with depression, and that he had taken the medication on his own. Evelyn, they claimed, was simply a woman in mourning, misunderstood and unfairly targeted by a system that wanted to blame someone. But as the trial continued, the jury couldn't ignore the overwhelming evidence of Evelyn's manipulation. The private investigator's testimony, combined with the damning text messages, created a picture of a woman who had gone to extreme lengths to keep Lucas in her life, no matter the cost. On August 2nd, 2023, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Evelyn Briscoe was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. For Lucas's mother, Brenda, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but no verdict could bring her son back. The town of Clearwater would never forget the tragedy of Lucas Donovan, nor the chilling truth behind his marriage to Evelyn Briscoe. With Evelyn Briscoe sentenced to 25 years in prison, the town of Clearwater was left to grapple with the shock and grief that followed Lucas Donovan's tragic death. The case had captured national attention, but for those closest to Lucas, the trial's conclusion brought little solace. For Brenda Donovan, Lucas's mother, the weight of her loss was overwhelming. She had always known something was wrong in her son's marriage, but she could never have predicted that it would end in such tragedy. Brenda, now left without her only son, tried to find comfort in the fact that justice had been served. The town held a memorial service for Lucas just weeks after the trial ended. It was a quiet, somber affair, attended by friends, family, and even those who had only known him in passing. Lucas's dream of becoming a photographer was honored, with a small gallery set up featuring his work. The images were a poignant reminder of the creative spirit that had once been so full of life, now lost forever. As for Evelyn Briscoe, her life behind bars would be a far cry from the luxury she once enjoyed. The media lost interest after the trial ended, but for those who followed the case, Evelyn became a symbol of greed and control gone too far. Her wealth and influence, once so powerful, had crumbled under the weight of the evidence against her. Detective Sylvia Harris, reflecting on the case, summed up the feelings of many involved. "It's tragic. Lucas was a young man full of potential, but Evelyn saw him as something she could own, not someone she could love. Control was all that mattered to her, and when that control slipped, she took drastic measures." In the months that followed, the story of Lucas Donovan's death became a quiet memory in Clearwater. The community slowly returned to normal, but the unsettling reality of what had happened behind the closed doors of the Briscoe mansion would linger for years. Lucas's name became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most serene places can hide dark secrets. As the sun set on Clearwater, one thing remained certain. Lucas Donovan had been taken far too soon, but his story would continue to resonate as a tragic example of manipulation, power, and the devastating consequences of control. And that wraps up the tragic story of Lucas Donovan and the twisted web of control that led to his untimely death. What do you think? Do you believe justice was truly served, or was there more to this story than we uncovered? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to hit the like button, share it with others, and make sure to subscribe to True Crime Chronicles for more gripping crime stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.